that we made for the 90 kilo patient. But that's all. I'll put my LinkedIn info in the chat there, and I look forward to any questions.
Amazing presentation, Brett. I every time I listen to you, I learn something new. So yes, we do have quite a few questions. Let me start with Shay's question. What surface scanners? So you mentioned a couple scanners. Like, what surface scanners are you using that can capture high resolution details? Yeah.
Sure. So I mostly use the structure scanner, which is an iPad-based scanner. And then what we do is we also take circumference measurements a lot of times just to verify the dimensions and make sure there aren't distortions. With the iPhone, it's using the front-facing camera, and the app that I like best for that is called EM3D. It's a free app, and then it's a one-time, I think, $7 fee to export STL files. So those are the main two.
Awesome. And you talked that you experiment with a variety of printing process and materials, and we have a material expert Raw in the audience, and he's wondering, what polymers have you tried?
Sure. So when it comes to DLP resins, I've mostly used Soraya Tech's fast resin, and I also use a lot of PLA resin as well. And then with FDM, we're using anything from polypropylene to PLA.
Well, maybe Rob can hook you up with some new materials that he's inventing.
I would love that. Yeah, there's a big need for that.
He's great. And I have another question from Laura. It says they have new thermoplastic 3D printing carbon fiber reinforcement. Have you ever thought about using that for your orthosis?
Yes, I have thought about that. That is in our future. Shriners Hospital actually asked us the same question. So yes, we are going to go through the process of doing some R&D and understanding what that looks like to print with carbon fiber.
Yeah, so Laura, I think you should just reach out to Brett directly. And also after this event, we have an expo area. I encourage everybody to meet everyone directly on screen. We can't do that with webinars. So that's another opportunity to connect. Okay, we have another question from Chris. Do you face challenges with patients maintaining a pose during scanning? How are you manipulating the pose after the scan?
Sure. So great question. It can be challenging to scan patients. We've had patients with Parkinson's disease that have a hard time, sitting as still as they need to on a scan. Sometimes I'll literally use a cane and have a patient support their hand with a cane, and then we'll take a measurement where the cane obscures the hand. Now we're using that glass plate more, which helps patients to, have less positional intolerance. And then, sorry, what was the second part of the question there? I think it was Or
are you going to manipulate it after you scan?
Oh, yes. Yes. So there are actually a number of orthopedic specific software programs now. The main two that I've used are Spenties and Mercurus. So they allow you to actually drop pins on landmarks around the joint. And then from there, that creates an axis of rotation or flexion and extension. So it's actually really, really simple, luckily.
Great. Maybe you can type those software names into the chat box, people can share. And then we have another question. What are your thoughts on the cost window for printing, scanning, and software solutions that enable acceptable return on investment in the eye of the provider?
Sure. I think they're all pretty cost effective. I've looked at a lot of the options out there. And with the reimbursement rates versus the software subscription fees, typically if you do one orthoses a month, you'll cover that software subscription fee and the design fee. And then the materials are negligible, and then it's just your time of post-processing. So at this point, we've gotten really efficient with the post-processing to where it only takes us 10, 15 minutes. So all in all, yes, it's very cost effective.
And we have another question from Nick, which is the last question. I'm gonna have to move on to the next speaker. He said, I noticed most of the hand orthoses are either on dorsal or volar side. Don't you think circumferential ones would be more protective for distal radial fractures compared to full cast?
Yeah, actually, typically when it just comes to an orthoses, we don't circumferentially wrap the hand for two reasons. One, because we want positioning and we want maximal use of the hand. So unlike a cast where you are trying to protect, the hardware is already in the bone. It'll integrate, and as long as the hand's positioned well, that's all we need. And so for that reason, and also for the reason of not trying to put pressure on incision sites, we almost always leave the splint as a one-sided splint.
Yeah, that makes sense. Probably more comfortable for patients.
Mm-hmm.
Right. We're going to move on to the next speaker. Our last speaker, but not the least, is Dr. Frederick Schint. I hope I'm pronouncing that name right. He is also orthopedic surgeon and also a founder of 2 different medical device companies, which is extremely impressive and inspiring. Frederick, I hope that you can join us from the backstage to our webinar. You just have to click on the webinar on the bottom. So this new platform, everybody has to learn. My belief is that this will augment our audience's experience down the line. So a little bit pain up front, but long-term return on happiness, hopefully. And so one of the things I've been typing in the chat is that we can also join on Zoom after this webinar. You can experience, why I think there's benefit of using this platform. So Frederick, are you able to, you just have to, okay, on the bottom of your screen, there is a button called webinar. Just click on that. And Clement, are you there? Okay. Oh, you know what? I figure out something. There you go. I can move you guys. Okay, that's fantastic. So you can start sharing your screen and we can start a presentation.
Perfect. Okay. So I cannot share my screen anymore. I could share it backstage, but not here. So I think I need to have some. Oh, now I can. Okay, never mind. Got it.
Yes, it just takes a few seconds.
That should work now.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Yes. So I'm very sorry about the technical problem. Thank you very much, Clemence, for your help. So Jenny, I'm Emeritus Professor of Orthopedics and Surgery, indeed, and I'm the founder of Brace. Slide, please. Slide, Clemence. Yes, so I wanted to start with definitions. So an orthosis is an external device allowing to correct a deficient function, like radial nerve palsy, for example, slides. It can be either static or dynamic, like here in this patient with this deficient extensor tendon. Slide, please. This is done with thermoplastics. And cast and splints immobilize the affected extremity, for example, the distal radius fracture, and braces are removable splints fabricated from light and resist material. And this is the place where we can bring 3D printing. Slide, please. So it can be. So I will start with the non-traumatic indications of braces. These non-traumatic are degenerative and neurological conditions. What are the current characteristics? There is a long duration of limb support. So during months, sometimes years. So the aspects of comfort and aesthetics play a big role. But the patient may wait some time before getting his or her brace. Slide, please. Slide, Clemence. And 3D printing allows light, elegant, and comfortable braces which are delivered after a few days, which are much superior to low temperature thermoplastics or the over-the-shelf braces, like you can see slide on your right. No, on the right, yes. Slide, please. What are the problems of 3D printing? First, the imprecisions of scanning, especially in case of tremor, of slight motion. We just spoke about that. The time also taken for the design of the brace, but fortunately at 3Brace, we have a special software allowing us to import a scan. And then, as you can see, we click on some anatomical landmarks to orient the software. It takes 2 or 3 minutes maybe to do that. And while the algorithm is working, we enter the data of the patient, and then we can determine where the splint will end proximally and distally, and also at the thumb. And then the algorithm is working, and after 1 or 2 minutes, you see the brace under your eyes, and it can be sent to our company to be delivered by express mail. Problems is, of course, that the brace, as compared to over the shelf, is not immediately delivered after the medical consultation. Pricing also, because 3D printing, at least with the nylon that we use, is expensive. Slide. And of course, in Europe, there is the medical device regulation, making this medical device not easy to put on the market. Slide. So these were the non-traumatic indication. Regarding the traumatic indications, it would be good to have 3D printing to treat sprains. Sprains affect young adults and teenagers who are sporting. Main location are finger, knee, elbow, and shoulder. And the usual treatment is a short immobilization followed by physiotherapy. Sometimes a surgery in function of the severity of the lesions. And additive printing is actually not used, to my knowledge, for sprains because it's not available in emergency. It's not adapted very well to knee and shoulder, but a good indication could be an adjunct to physiotherapy, for example, posture brace or dynamic splints. Slide, please. Now, let's speak about the fractures. The classical treatment, at least until maybe 40 years ago, was plaster cast immobilization. But patients hate plaster. It's cumbersome, it's heavy, it's inelegant, it's detested by the patients. And actually, if you look at the scaphoid fractures affecting young patients, many patients remove by themselves the plaster cast. They cannot tolerate it for 3 months. The other problem is limb swelling. Clémence was a little bit quick, but it's not very important. The limb swelling that subsides after several days. So initially, the plaster cast is too tight, and then it doesn't immobilize anymore the limb. And high pressures on the plaster cast, slide please, Clémence, can go up to 60 millimeter mercury, can cause a compression of veins and lymphatics, and these can lead to very serious, very severe complication called the CRPS that will have sequels for months and years. Of course, you can avoid high pressure by more padding, but then there is an increased risk of secondary fracture displacement. Slide, please. Yeah, we did a study a long time ago about the pressure on the plaster cast. So after a few days, the plaster cast does not immobilize at all the fractured limb. Slide, please, Clémence. And 1/3 of initially undisplaced risk fractures will displace under plaster cast immobilization. This is a very caricatural example. This patient came to me after distal radius fracture, and actually she removes every day the plaster cast to wash her hand. But slide, please. This is, we of course operate a lot distal radius fractures, and this is a CT scan that we have done, and we have done many before the surgery. And you can see the plaster cast, you can see the limb, you can see the bones. And what is in black is actually the space between the plaster cast that is very irregular and the skin. Slide, please. I have put it in pink. And slide, please. And we have done measurements of this gap space. Slide, please. And we have published on that. And the gap space under a plaster cast of Paris, go back, Clémence, is about 4 millimeter. About a synthetic is the same, and the roughness is very important with the plaster cast and also with the synthetic. So that's the problem of the plaster cast for treatment of fractures, and maybe there is a place for 3D printing in these fractures. Slide, please. So what happens is that when the swelling diminishes, the fracture redisplays. Initially, this is the initial situation with the fracture in red. Slide, please. And then the reduction is good, but you see the swelling on the dorsum of the wrist. Slide, please. And when the swelling subsides, there is a gap space and the fracture redisplaced. Slide, please. So this is a 54-year-old active female patient, non-displaced fracture. After a couple of weeks on the plaster caster immobilization, the radius subsides, and there is a conflict between the uninjured bone, now with the carpal bones. Slide, please. And this gives pain and limitation of rotation of the forearm. Slide, please. This is why most fractures are nowadays operated at the distal radius or at the ankle. It allows good maintain of fracture reduction. Slide, please. But there are disadvantages. It's very costly, 2 surgical procedures, because frequently you have to remove the plate, hospitalization for the degenerate patient. There is a loss of autonomy. Slide, please. There are complications after surgery up to 27%. On your right, the most severe complication I have ever seen after a plate fixation. It's not for me, fortunately. You don't avoid plaster cast immobilization postoperatively. Slide, please. It's also very well demonstrated that in all the patients, a good reduction does not mean necessarily better functional results than after a poor reduction under a plaster cast. Slide, please. So these fractures are more and more frequent in our osteoporotic and aging populations, and I believe there is a place for 3D printed braces. Slide, please. Slide. So in Switzerland, with our company, with the Academic Hospital of Bern, we have studied casting in patients presenting undisplaced distal radius and scaphoid fracture. It is prospective randomized study comparing our cast that you can see on the bottom right and the synthetic, modern synthetic cast. And in black are the results with our brace, and you can see that our brace was superior for experience of the patient, for safety, for activities of daily living and of satisfaction. And also on the left, you can see that with our brace, the patient had almost no pain as compared to the immobilization with the synthetic cast. Slide, please. And we have put these in number for effectiveness and slide, Clémence, also for patient satisfaction. And you can see that 3D printed braces are always superior or at least equivalent to the standard cast, synthetic cast, and slide. And to the conclusion is that our casts are better tolerated and safer than a synthetic modern cast. Slide, please. We did also mechanical testing of our braces, which are very light, 57 gram only, and our braces actually are more resistant than conventional cast and over-the-shelf braces. Slide, please. But not everything is solved. We have the difficulties to scan a deformed limb in the case of a fracture. There is a time to deliver the brace while the treatment of the fracture should be immediate, and we need adaptation to the swelling, but we believe that our opening on the ulnar side allows this adaptation to the swelling. So in conclusion, 3D braces are the future of orthopedic immobilization. They are more anatomical, smooth than conventional casting. They are light and elegant, washable. The patient can take a shower or a bath with the brace. Our casts are light and more resistant than other forms of immobilization. We have a clinical proof of concept in distal radius and scaphoid fractures, of course, undisplaced or minimally displaced fractures. Slide. We believe that in the future, 3D printed casts could prevent surgery in relatively stable fractures, especially in geriatric patients. A slide, please. But they are, and in addition, there are many non-traumatic indications. Slide, please. But of course, there are a lot of limitations. We need to better scanning and point-of-care rapid printing. A slide. The cost, but if we avoid the surgery, the costs are bearable. And in Europe, the regulatory obligations, maybe also in the US, I don't know exactly. I'm very sorry about the technical difficulties to do this presentation, but I thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you, Clémence. You can stop sharing the screen.
Thank you, Frederick. That's a fantastic presentation. I, again, learned just the whole spectrum of what happens when you have a fracture. I think a lot of people in the audience as well. One thing, I actually had a colleague in the summer injured her ankle, and she was wearing this really heavy brace, and it was hot. It was extremely not just painful, but uncomfortable. But then, I'm located in San Francisco, and we actually have no availability of this sort of thing, even though I see this on a daily basis. And so how are you providing availability to your potential patients? Where can they get this?
Well, actually, the difficulty is actually the scanning, because the physiotherapist or the traumatology, they are not experienced in scanning. So we have to go now in Switzerland to the hospital where they order some braces from us to do the scanning. So we have to work on the scanning. Regarding the fractures of the ankle, most of the fractures are now operated, but there are studies from in Great Britain showing that with a very tight casting, traditional casting, and they do that in operation room, they really mold well the plaster cast. The results are actually better with the casting of course, in relatively simple fractures. And we believe that we can do the same or even better by 3D printing. But we have we are developing an ankle brace, but we have not the clinical experience with that, so we don't know yet.
What about
we believe that we could do a very light brace that even could be worn, I don't know, for a fracture, but it is for a sprain in the shoe.
What if you just twist your ankle? Do you think a 3D printed brace would help better than the cast? Because people still get a cast for just twisted ligamentous injury, not fracture.
Of course. I'm convinced that this is a big place for 3D printing.
Let's see, we have an audience question from Nick. What material do you use for the hand brace? It's a similar question to Brett.
Polyamide is a nylon, and but we have also resins that we are using also. But at the present time, we don't print by ourselves. We use a subcontracting for the braces. But we plan to buy a resin printer like the previous speaker mentioned.
Yeah, he's doing it. He's doing it at home. Are you doing it at home, Brett, or are you? Actually, everybody, all the speakers can come onto the screen now because we only have a couple of minutes left for the question. So Nick here has 3 questions in one, really. He also asked another question. How do you cater for the reduction of swelling after initial trauma? Do you have more than one cast for one patient, or do you, yeah, I think that's his question. Do you have like more than one cast to prepare for his swelling and changes for different patients?
The question is for me or not? Or
for you. Yeah. And also, Brett, since you guys are basically doing the same thing as well. So, Frederick, I want you to start first, and then Brett.
There is a very big opening on the ulnar side, and this opening allows to adjust to the swelling. And the closing, we just do Velcro, and the patient actually can tighten more or give more space for the brace.
Okay.
This is how we work.
Great. So,
yeah,
so just.
Yeah, Jenny, and I would say same thing when we use a flexible filament like polypropylene. We can leverage the Velcro with that. to make it tighter or looser. And then of course, checking the capillary refill of the patient's fingernails, making sure it's not too tight. But yes, the difference I think between what and Frederic are doing is, he's got the cast to try to avoid surgery. And for me, I'm after surgery to where the patients already had their reduction. And so we're not trying to, compress the fracture anymore. We're more just trying to position. But good question.
Okay, so I have a general question for all the panelists today is how do you encourage adoption into healthcare? What are your challenges and some of the tips you can share? I'll start with David.
Yeah, I think we talked about this briefly, that you just have to have better technology, right? There has to be, not better technology, you have to have a better clinical application. So when you can make the life of clinicians better, and really the whole stack of stakeholders, clinicians, hospital costs, insurers, payers, that it works well for them. Once you factor in every stakeholder and you make something tangibly better, that's when you're going to see clinical adoption. Novelty is not enough. It has to be tangibly better.
And so are you saying that you have to show them the clinical data? This is definitively more beneficial. I mean, to me, it's like the N is equal to 1, that number 1 patient that you can get to, that you can sell your product to is probably the most challenging.
Yeah, I mean, for a clinician, then the data matters a ton, but to a hospital, it's pure economics. Same thing with the payers. Payers will care about the data. For the patients, right? Patients are another key stakeholder. As soon as you have something like SwiBrace or this really novel technology, it makes the patient's life so much tangibly better. Having lived in a cast for many weeks of my life, it's really uncomfortable. You're making something that's tangibly better for the patients. That's how you're going to get clinical adoption, is you're just addressing each stakeholder and making it better for them.
Yeah, what I love about this panel is everybody, it was really speaking from a patient's perspective, and probably innovation come out of frustration a lot of times. And Ruben, do you have any thought on how to encourage adoption in healthcare?
Yeah, I think I look at it a little bit differently, but I think we need more and better education on 3D printing for the current and future engineers that will be developing the next generation medical devices. I see, for example, in the university here in Leuven, Belgium, that there is like a specific course on additive manufacturing, and it's getting more and more popularity every year. But I think that that's what's missing, because most often we see designs that are like not tailored for additive manufacturing, or still some CPQs mentioned on it that are actually for CNC machining. So there needs to be more and better education on additive manufacturing for the engineers.
Yeah, I've been trying forever to trying to use 3D Heals as a platform for education, but the challenge is, you can't really learn everything just by virtual events. A lot of stuff you have to really have hands-on experience, which is the challenge. And Frederic, you're already, well embedded in the hospital system, so I would assume that encourage your colleague to use SwiBrace is not as hard, but I'm sure you still experience challenges. How do you overcome those?
I think all the colleagues, all the physiotherapists, they are convinced that 3D printing is the future of orthosis. They are convinced about that. But to do it, they think it's not mature, especially the scanning process is not mature, and they don't know how to do it. They see the benefits, but it's not hard to convince them that it's the future. It's hard to convince them to other braces because of scanning and cost and all these things, and regulation in Europe.
And if you're going to have opportunity to, say, improve your current product for SwiBrace to make this process easier, what is one thing that you want to do?
We would like to improve the scanning, that's one thing, and we would like also to develop a system. It exists, but it needs to be adapted to the hospital, point of care treatment in printing in hospital. I think this is needed, I think.
Thank you.
Because you lose time also by sending the braces.
Right.
To the
Yeah. lots of logistics challenges, it sounds like.
Yes.
Brett, you're a true believer already, and I see you have a kudos for Frederick for his product. But I'm sure, like when you started, your patient number one, how do you convince the surgeon that this is the right way to take care of his patient? How do you convince the patient that this is good for him?
Sure. Well, I guess I was lucky that I started at a time to where we were out of options. It was either going to the hardware store and buying Kydex or 3D printing in orthoses, right? So we're lucky that we got started during the pandemic. But I have thought a lot about how come in the dental world, adoption of 3D dentures and bridges and crowns are so high, but in the orthopedic world, we have more trouble. And I think that's because in the dental world, they've already had roles of dental assistants that are kind of half technician, half clinician, where in physical therapy, for instance, we don't have that. Everyone sees patients a very full schedule. And so having to change the workflow, change roles, I think is going to be the challenge. And that's, for instance, why my printers are at home, is we had our clinic before we had our 3D printers. So there wasn't a dedicated space for it. And so I think those are the issues that we really have to think about, is how do we have this workflow make sense for the industry?
Yeah, fantastic. So as a final conclusion of this event, I want you guys to tell the audience what you're looking for in 2023 and the short term, maybe 3-5 years, who you want to connect with, what kind of projects you're taking on. Maybe just name one or two. I'll start with David.
Oh, goodness. Yeah, so we're launching our product this year. We're going to the FDA shortly. So I'm looking forward to seeing people out there clinically, and hopefully if anybody's at any of the academic shows, to see them there. But what I'm hoping to see in the industry is a lot more innovation. As paradigms are kind of changing and shifting, it's exciting to see novel technology. I mean, all of the orthoses are new to me, and this is incredibly new and neat technology. I'm looking forward to seeing it this year.
I'm a radiologist. I read fracture wrist all the time, and I never knew there's so much care involved. So yeah, thanks. I echo your feeling, David. Ruben, what about you? Any wish list for 2023 here?
Yeah, or even beyond that. Yeah, we actually look forward to partner with medical device OEMs to bring the technologies that I pitched today, like the deformable implants and the multi-metal printing, to really bring that to the hospitals, to the patients. So we're really looking forward to that.
So more David, basically, for you.
Absolutely. More Davids. The world needs more Davids.
I'll find some for you. Frederick, any wish list for 2023?
Yes, first thing, we need to finalize the technical documentation to get the official authorization to sell within MDR. Will be done very shortly. Also, we want to test to develop other types of braces, because there are a lot of application also for the fingers, not only for the wrist, and also for the ankle and for the humerus also.
Great. I mean, if I break something, I'll call you.
Thank you. Don't break anything.
I try not to. Brett, any wish list?
Sure. So my wish list is to have continued provider involvement in conflict zones. One of the projects I've been involved with is taking 3D scans from Ukraine, helping to build the orthoses files, and then they can be printed locally there. And so I think just having providers understand that you can be helpful in regions of the world where you aren't, and where perhaps you can't even be, and just for everyone to get involved, in any of the traumatic situations around the world.
Yeah. One of the best things about 3D Heroes events, you always meet people with very interesting backgrounds. So Brett is very social conscious, and also he is an ambassador from Hawaii to Ireland. Is that right? Did I say that right?
Yes, to Belfast, Northern Ireland. Yes.
Exactly. I mean, how do you make that connection, right? Come to the 3D Heroes events. That's how you make that connection. So think we need to conclude our webinar, official webinar. However, I will be in the expo area. So what you do is after we exit this webinar, there is the expo link on top, and you just click on the San Francisco booth, and hopefully you can join us. It's a venture. And I want to thank all the speakers today for donating their time free to teach us their technology and their insights about the industry. Thank you so much, guys. And I'll see you at Expo. Hopefully I can see you.